Welcome to the Association for the Study of African American Life and History's 2023 Black History Month Virtual Plus experience. Today, our program, African American Music and the Struggle for Freedom, will be getting underway in a matter of moments. The leadership team of ASALH would like to acknowledge our members, supporters, and our sponsors, without whom these and all of our programs would not be possible. And please be sure to go to our website for a complete list of programs that will be available all month long right here on ASALH TV. But first, we will begin today's program with the singing of the Negro National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, as performed by the 105 Voices of History under the direction of Roland M. Carter.
Lift every voice and sing. Lift every
And now, from the Festival Planning Committee for the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, the moderator for our program, Mr. Lewis Hicks.
Good evening. My name is Lewis Hicks. I'm one of the members of the 2023 ASALH Black History Festival Leadership Committee. I'd like to thank you on behalf of the festival's planning team, the ASALH Executive Council, the staff, and the volunteers for joining us for this evening's program. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce today's panel exploring the musical aspects of the 2023 Black History theme, Black Resistance. The scholars assembled here today will share their unique perspective about the program's topic, African American music and the struggle for freedom. But before we hear from our panel, I'd like to share how you can help keep this kind of programming alive. Tonight's program is being offered as a free program, but there are expenses involved in presenting this program and other programs like it. ASALH is a membership organization and relies on donations and support through membership for people just like you. You too can make sure these types of programs continue to be offered for free by becoming a member of ASALH. If you're not a member of ASALH, please go to the ASALH website, asalh.org, and join today. Having said that, let's get down to the business of our panel discussion. This panel grew out of a call to my longtime friend and mentor, Dr. John Fleming. I asked John for his recommendations of people who might speak to the 2023 theme, Black Resistance, specifically as it relates to African American music. I reached out to John because of his extensive connections in the scholarly community, as well as his role in opening several African American museums across the country. Most recently, Dr. Fleming was instrumental in planning the opening of the National African American Museum in Nashville, Tennessee. He served as the founding director of the museum. During our initial conversation, John suggested that I talk to the recognized authority on African American music, Dr. Portia Maultsby. While talking to Dr. Maultsby, she recommended that I invite a group of scholars who recently published a book on the Black Lives Movement. That recently released book is Black Lives Matter and Music, Protest, Intervention, Reflection. After conferring with the scholars, we were able to form the panel into what we have today. Now that you have the backstory of the panel, I'd like to share a little bit about our panel moderator, Dr. Portia Maultsby. Dr. Maultsby is recognized as the foremost authority on African American music, not just in the US, but around the world. Portia K. Maultsby is Professor Emeriti of Ethnomusicology in the Department of Folklore and Ethnomusicology and founding director of the Archives of African American Music and Culture at Indiana University. That collection grew out of her personal collection, and by 2003, it had grown to include more than 10,000 pieces of music and music-related items, including interviews, photographs, and recordings. Also included among her accomplishments, Dr. Maultsby is founding director of the Indiana University's Soul Review, the country's first credit-bearing ensemble specializing in Black popular music. Dr. Maultsby received a master's and PhD in ethnomusicology from the University of Wisconsin. She specializes in African American music with a focus on religious and popular traditions, African cultural heritage, and the music industry. Professor Maultsby is co-editor of African American Music, an Introduction, and Issues in African American Music, Power, Gender, Race, Representation, both published by Routledge Press, and author of the Interactive Timeline of African American Music, developed in collaboration with the Carnegie Hall and permanently featured on the Hall's website. And now I present to you Dr. Portia Maultsby, who will begin her role as moderator by introducing the esteemed panel of scholars.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us on this momentous occasion to discuss a very important topic: African American music and the struggle for freedom. The theme of Black resistance for ASALH's third annual Black History Month Festival speaks to the ongoing struggle of African Americans to realize and experience racial equality in all aspects of American life. History demonstrates that steps towards progress always has been met with white resistance. Many, for example, both Blacks and whites, thought that we had overcome racial barriers with the two-term presidency of Barack Obama. Surprise, surprise, the ugly face of racism no longer hid behind the white sheets, and politicians no longer guised their contempt for Black people. And Black people led by the millennium generation and without fear have continued to organize, protest, and march racial injustices. Our discussion this evening will explore the ways in which music has remained central to various acts of Black resistance in the 21st century. Our panelists collectively will address the theme of Black resistance under the topic African American music and the struggle for freedom. We'll do so through multiple lenses and contexts. Our first presenter is John Fleming, Dr. John Fleming. A historian, he is Director Emeritus of Cincinnati Museum Center and former Director in Residence for the National Museum of African American Music. Dr. Fleming will provide an overview of African American protest music.
African American music, Black resistance, and the struggle for equality. The central theme in African American history is this fight against racism and the struggle for equality. Our music has played a vital role in this history, from the sorrow songs, "Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen," that expresses the pain, the suffering of slaves, to their desire for freedom in such songs as "Still Away to Jesus" and "Go Down Moses." Following the Civil War, Black people sought not only to express their desire for freedom through their music, which was a counter-narrative to the racial identity imposed by whites, to one that was positive and affirming. "Lift Every Voice and Sing," written by James Weldon Johnson, became the Negro national anthem with its uplifting emphasis on liberty and ultimate freedom over oppression. But victory was not to be won without a hard fight. In 1910, W.E.B. Du Bois helped organize the NAACP to fight against the lynchings and racial injustice. Despite these efforts and those of Ida B. Wells, thousands of people continued to be lynched during the first half of the 20th century. Billie Holiday, the First Lady of Blues, popularized "Strange Fruit," a song about lynching written by Abel Meeropol, a Jewish school teacher. Holiday's recording label, Columbia Records, refused to record the song for fear of reprisals from Southern record stores. Commodore Records released the song with these powerful words: "Strange trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood on the root. Black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from poplar trees." While the song was about the lynching, of Black people, it was also a metaphor for all of the overt and covert forms of racism that Black people faced. Following World War II, there was a reawakening in the Black community with an urgent demand for justice and equality. The rise of the civil rights movement also saw an increase in protest songs across many genres, many being adopted from old hymns. All took lyrics and music from the past and applied it to the civil rights struggle. I Will Overcome became a 19th century song revised by cigar workers in Charleston, South Carolina in the 1940s, and then as a protest song was revised by Pete Seeger in the Highlander Folk School in the 1960s that became We Shall Overcome. The song was adopted by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, in 1960. This Little Light of Mine, sang by Sunday school children, would become the song sung by civil rights activists as they marched and demonstrated throughout the South. The words, "I'm gonna let it shine," signified a determination and a fierce urgency to break out of the darkness of segregation, to bloom as a free people. Songs were created to express the determination of the movement to end segregation in America. Keep Your Eyes on the Plow, Hold On, sang on Johns Island, South Carolina, was changed to Keep Your Eyes on the Prize. Ann Wine, member of the Progressive Club and Moving Star Hall, brought the song to the movement to encourage people to endure during the long struggle for freedom. Oh, freedom, and before I'll be a slave, I will be buried in my grave, rooted in slavery, popularized by Joan Baez, and sang during the March on Washington in 1963. Another song which had taken root in the early labor movement and transformed by the civil rights movement was We Shall Not Be Moved, which emphasized standing up against those in power and refusing to give in. Like a tree planted by the water, we shall not be moved. Nina Simone, an activist performer in the 1960s, sacrificed her career to be young, gifted, and Black, was a tribute to young men and women and their heritage. During the height of the movement, when Black people were killed and beaten in the South, she recorded Mississippi Goddamn as part of the ever-growing protest repertoire. The staple singers, the choir of the civil rights movement, were looking beyond race and racism in recording I Know a Place, Y'all, I'll Take You There. Ain't nobody crying, ain't nobody worried. Their song, Respect Yourself, speaks to Black people of the need to respect oneself and others, while letting white people know to take the sheets off your face. It's a brand new day. Sam Cooke let everyone know that a change was going to come, even though it has been a long time coming. Curtis Mayfield wrote People Get Ready, recorded both by Aretha Franklin and the Impressions, and the song so impressed the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King that he thought of it as the unofficial anthem of the movement. People get ready to march and be ready to change. James Brown said it best when he proclaimed that Black people should say it loud, I am Black and I am proud. Black musicians gave Black people through their songs the motivation to sing for courage, unity, strength, inspiration, joy, hope, and finally perseverance to overcome. Influenced by the Black Power movement and the Black arts movement of the 1960s, H. Rap Brown, Amira Baraka, Nikki Giovanni, Ismail Reed, Sonia Sanchez, and the Last Poets continued the spoken word tradition within the Black community, which was instrumental in giving rise to rap and hip hop that would later become the voice of the new urban scene. Africa Bambaataa and DJ Hurt and Grandmaster Flash emphasized rapping rather than gang violence. The Sugar Hill Gang produced the national recording hit Rapper's Delight in 1979. Public Enemy recorded Fight the Power, and in 1989, Spike Lee's film Do the Right Thing, which even in its controversy became an anthem for African-American youth. African-American music and musicians have long voiced the urgency of speaking out against the issues of slavery, Jim Crow, systemic racism, and police brutality and killing. The Black community responded to the death of George Floyd, who died at the hands of the police in Minneapolis on May the 28th, 2020, in ways ranging from a searing public outrage in Minneapolis to a firestorm on social media to a simultaneous rise in national and international protests. In reacting to the killing of Trayvon Martin in Stanford, Florida, Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, Tamar Rice in Cleveland, Ohio, John Crawford in Beaver Creek, Ohio, and Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky, the Black community said enough. Such killings fuel the Black Lives Matter movement and the demand for racial justice. The Black Lives Matter movement is motivated by the rampant racism of police brutality and murder of young Black people. These killings have ignited the passion of Black musicians to use their music as the voice of protest and the urgency of social and racial justice now. Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five recorded the message that was not only a social commentary on the stress of urban life Black people face surrounded by poverty, but also served as a platform for social protest with lyrics like, "It's a jungle sometimes, makes me wonder I can keep from going under." Kendrick Lamar's All Right speaks of the beauty of Black life within the environment of oppression and police killing, and his song, "We're Gonna Be All Right," became the anthem for Black Lives Matter protesters. Eric Garner's last words, "I Can't Breathe," inspired India Ari to write Breathe. She created a video in which children surrounded her where she sang, "Sometimes you can't believe what your eyes see on TV." And the children responded, "Continue to breathe." Lauryn Hill recorded Black Rage that was later dedicated to the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, where she cites from history all the raping, beatings, killing, and other means of social control on which the current Black Rage is based. Black music is rooted within the lived experience of Black people, so it is only logical that our music is a reflection of and a means of protest and resistance to racism and social injustice. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fleming. Our next presenter is Dr. Allie Martin, an ethnomusicologist and assistant professor of music at Dartmouth College. And she is in the cluster for digital humanities and social engagement. She is joining us from Italy, where she is a resident at the Boglizio Foundation. Her presentation this evening is Living the Movement, Go-Go Music and Black Lives Matter in Washington, D.C. Dr. Allie Martin.
Thank you, Dr. Maultsby, for that introduction. Thank you for having me, everyone on this panel. I'm glad to be here with my colleagues and mentors. I'm going to share my screen here. My work in our book project, Black Lives Matter in Music, was largely about go-go music, a subgenre of funk music from Washington, D.C. Go-go is a very fitting case study to think through African-American music and the struggle for freedom, because of the way that the musical community works against state-sanctioned violence, both locally and around the world. I want to use this time to offer some thoughts extending the argument that I was making in our book project, and give a few examples of how go-go has continued to operate as a vehicle for protest and resilience. Go-go came of age in DC in the 1970s, around the same time as hip hop in New York City. Rather than perfecting the connection between the MC and the DJ that would become contemporary rap music, go-go musicians were developing full live bands to keep people going on the dance floor in a different way, through performance styles that kept the groove going between songs, creating long sets that never let up. And if you've never heard go-go music, I'll play a little for you now from Chuck Brown and the Soul Searchers. Chuck Brown, pictured here on the far right with the guitar, is known as the godfather of go-go music in Washington, D.C. And this is his song Bustin' Loose from 1978.
I feel like bustin' loose, give me the bread now. I feel like bustin' loose now. Bustin' loose in the evening, bustin' loose can be pleasing. Talk about bustin' loose, y'all. Bustin' loose in the meantime, bustin' loose make you feel fine. Talk about bustin' loose, gal. Bustin' loose to my love Jones, bustin' loose to each his own. Talk about bustin' loose, y'all. Bustin' loose to my love Jones, bustin' loose to each his own. Give me the bridge, y'all.
I'll stop that there. Musically, go-go is located within an Afro-diasporic sonic lineage, emphasizing repetition, participatory performance, polyrhythms, and percussive timbres. Bands typically consist of a drum set, 2 sets of congas, auxiliary percussion like a tambourine or a cowbell, at least 1 keyboard, an electric bass, a lead guitar, and a few vocalists. Go-go bands always include what's called a lead talker, also called a lead mic, whose function is to interact with the audience and lead the band. And because this is a genre built on live performance, the audience is considered an important part of the band as well. The singers and the lead mic are on the front line, with the percussionist and the guitarist making up the back line. The most important component in the go-go sound is the beat, commonly referred to as the pocket. And go-go music has for a long time been representative of the working class Black population of DC, being the soundtrack of the city for almost 50 years. And I say that the music has been representative in this way because go-go has experienced the same scapegoating and distrust that Black people experience on a larger scale, being blamed for violence that is largely the fault of decades of disinvestment and struggles with addiction. In Black Lives Matter and Music, I analyzed go-go within the framework outlined by Alicia Garza, one of the co-founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. She argued that BLM was built to be a space of resilience against state-sanctioned violence, as well as a site for the affirmation of Black life. I argued then and continue to do so now that go-go music exemplifies both of these ideals and has done so for long before the Black Lives Matter movement existed. From t-shirts, mourning lost loved ones that they wear at shows, to protests against various policies and injustices, the go-go community operates as a space of both resilience and affirmation and continues to do so. This has been no clearer than in the #Don'tUDC movement that began in 2019, which put go-go music at the center of a conversation about gentrification, sound, and Black life. The story of Don'tUDC goes like this. Since 1995, Central Communications cell phone store owner Don Campbell has engaged in a simple yet subversive ritual almost every morning. When he opens the store, he sets speakers outside of the front door and plays go-go music. The music continues for the duration of the workday from about 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. and is the source of many a spontaneous dance party. And if you want to see these dance parties, they're on Instagram at Crane Corner. It's a great Instagram. And throughout the years, Campbell has received complaints about the volume of the music and even been asked to turn it off altogether. He always refused, confident in his compliance with DC noise regulations and knowing well enough to turn down the volume if the city sent out a representative with a decibel meter. But in April of 2019, things changed when a complaint was sent directly to T-Mobile's corporate office, and T-Mobile owns Metro PCS. According to the rumor, the complaining parties threatened to sue T-Mobile if the music was not turned off. And as this was relayed to Campbell, he finally agreed and turned it off, unwilling to lose his livelihood. But it didn't take long for the neighborhood to notice that the music was off, and less than 2 weeks later, Howard University student Julian Broomfeld, under the Twitter handle @HeroinJ, tweeted in support of Central Communications and started the hashtag #Don'tMuteDC. Her sequence of tweets directly blamed gentrification. She said, "I'm not a fan of go-go, but the dudes down at Metro PCS on Georgia have stopped playing their music. Apparently, the new white neighbors were complaining about the noise. Simply saying gentrification is sickening is an understatement." And then she said, "Use the hashtag #Don'tMuteDC when you tweet about this. We have to start somewhere." These tweets started an overwhelming avalanche of support for Central Communications. The same day that she tweeted, activist Ron Moulton and scholar Natalie Hopkinson started a petition entitled "Don't Mute DC's Go-Go Music and Culture." Thousands of tweets and over 80,000 signatures later, the music was turned back on and is still on now. Don't Mute DC morphed from hashtag to movement seemingly overnight as activists, artists, politicians, and countless others focused in on that intersection at 7th and Florida as a battleground against gentrification and cultural erasure. And as I've followed the news of Central Communications over the years, I've been struck by the go-go community's continued amplification, and extension of these goals. The protests and rallies held in defense of go-go affirm Black life and Black sound, rejecting the silencing strategies of gentrification, and instead working towards reestablishing go-go's presence in the city. Furthermore, the organizers and the advocates, people like Ron Moulton, Natalie Hopkinson, Kimon Freeman, Yada, they're collaborating with a number of organizations that attend to education and public health, making go-go the soundtrack to a much larger movement. Go-go musicians and organizers have continued to be instrumental in fighting for Black freedom. Organizations like Long Live Go-Go and Don't Mute DC, they organize rallies, protests, performances, they release songs and more. They've advocated for better healthcare for Black Washingtonians, especially with the closing of United Medical Center, more humanizing noise legislation, reform for citizens returning from incarceration, the destigmatization of go-go music, statehood for Washington, D.C., and the list goes on. City officials have responded to a number of these actions in both positive and negative ways. In 2020, Mayor Muriel Bowser signed legislation that named DC as the official music of Washington, D.C., which was celebrated as a significant gesture, but also questioned because of the lack of legislative and financial protections that this legislation had. Furthermore, Ward 1 council member Brianne Nadeau, she introduced the Harmonious Living Act of 2021, which is an updated Noise Control Standards Act that speak to the concerns of the musical community regarding previous legislation. Go-go musicians, fans, and advocates are just one rich case study on the ways in which Black music can spark change when used as a vehicle for protest, for resilience, and for action. Go-go music has always been a part of this conversation, and I look forward to continuing to amplify the efforts of this vibrant musical community. Thank you.
Thank you. We will have much to follow up on at the end of this conversation. Our next presenter is Dr. Langston Wilkins, an ethnomusicologist and assistant professor of folklore and African American music, African American studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His topic is Swagging for Respect, Hip Hop and Car Culture of Houston, the topic of his long-term research. Dr. Langston.
Thank you, Dr. Maultsby. Try to share my screen. Right. So happy to be here. Again, my name is Langston Wilkins. I'm an assistant professor of folklore and African American studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And as Dr. Maultsby stated, my presentation today centers on my long-term research on slab culture and hip hop culture in Houston, Texas. My particular presentation today focuses on the Houston Slab Parade and Family Festival, which is a 2013 event that highlights a vernacular car culture called Slab that is part of Houston, Texas's local hip hop music scene. So I'm going to explore how slabs and Houston hip hop culture reflect Black Lives Matter themes. First, slab is a form of unapologetic Blackness. Slab culture reflects the local Black community's desire for self-definition, and it's a resistance to mainstream subjugation. And the Slab Parade itself is a good example of what can happen when public funds are invested into Black culture. So real quick, what are slabs? Slabs are older modeled, so we're talking 1970s through 1990s modeled, large-sized American luxury cars like Lincolns, Cadillacs, Buicks, etc. Heavily customized with explosive paint jobs, booming sound systems, elaborate trunk displays, and most importantly, these cone-shaped chrome spoked rims called swangers or elbows. Slabs first emerged within the street culture of Houston's Black neighborhoods in the mid-1980s, but quickly became tied to the local hip hop scene. It became a core practice and symbol of local hip hop culture, the culture that many people call screw. And most people know screw because of its sonic aesthetic, which is super slow, atmospheric, and rhythmic. And let's listen to a brief sample of screw music. So slab and screw grew alongside each other in the Houston streets of the 1980s and 1990s and really became intertwined. The cars, the slab cars are actually a key way that the screw music is played and disseminated. So slab is essentially kind of a hybrid automotive and musical practice. As I mentioned, I think slab is rooted in the culture of working class Black men in Houston. In that community, it has several layers of meaning. One, it's a form of creative expression and an emotional outlet. Slab is also a unique form of cultural capital that helps garner the driver's respect within their community. And keeping with that community is also important, it's central. Slab riders use their cars to show love to their neighborhoods, their social groups, they memorialize friends and much more. And slab is also a tradition that's been passed down from generation to generation. So the Slab Parade was born out of my doctoral dissertation fieldwork. And just to note, my doctoral dissertation was co-chaired by Drs. Orejuela and Dr. Maultsby, who are on this panel. I was studying the importance and role of place and space in music making practices within the local hip hop scene. So looking at why Houston-based hip hop artists constantly feature references to streets, neighborhoods, apartments, and such. And during my field trips, I would see slabs everywhere. And so I realized that they were important parts of the story that I was trying to explore. But I had difficulties accessing the Slab community. Slabs and Screw are rooted in, again, this working class Black community in Houston, and really deeply rooted in the streets. And so these are folk who deal with racism, police harassment, and surveillance and more. And for many years, the media treated them like social pariahs. So they were naturally a bit protective of themselves and their culture. But thankfully, I was able to connect with the Black Boys Clique, a local rap group who had recently produced a song about Slab culture, and they helped me get connected to the Slab community. And so with their support, I began going to numerous Slab events, and it was at these events where I saw the community aspect of Slab and hip hop culture. So there were many car clubs at these events that represented different Houston neighborhoods. Cars would compete to see whose music was the loudest, and there were other forms of play. And of course, there were many hip hop performances. And so it was generally a celebratory atmosphere and truly about community. I began to conceptualize a massive event funded by civic institutions, hoping to break down social barriers to give the Slab or Slab culture the attention and respect that it deserved. I first took the idea to the Black Boys Clique to get their community input, and they were enthusiastic. I then took the idea to the Houston Arts Alliance and the Houston Museum of African American Culture, two organizations that I was working with at the time, and they signed on. And also Houston City Government, specifically District D, signed on as a partner as well. So the event planning team included cultural institutions, local government, academics, hip hop artists, and the Slab community. Just a quick note, I started doing this work during a complicated time for Slab culture. Mainstream media coverage focused on violence within the community. And recently, I think in 2011, a 3-year-old girl was killed during a Slab-related carjacking. And so I spent a lot of time educating the general public about Slab and hip hop and addressing their concerns. I actually gave a lecture on Slab at the Houston Museum of African American Culture to help people better understand the artistry and culture. And I also attended numerous community meetings around the city to gain community support and the use of infrastructure. And also local media was super curious, and they gave the planning committee a platform to talk about Slab culture and to reassure the public that this event would be safe and family friendly. So the Slab Parade took place on October 13th, 2013 at McGregor Park, which is a popular Slab gathering space for several generations and super important to the Black community in Houston. The event featured a 50-car processional through the streets. The processional turned into a car show at the park. At the park, there was a festival featuring Black food vendors, Black street artists, and musical performances by rap acts like the Black Boys Clique and others. And it was a super successful event. The reported turnout was about 4,000, and the crowd was super diverse. Since the parade in the last 10 years, hip hop and Slab has become a pretty valued cultural production and symbol of local life. It's to some extent moved from the margins to the mainstream. And that's been reflected in mainstream media coverage both within and outside the city. For example, Anthony Bourdain, Parts Unknown, the popular TV show, featured Slab in one of its episodes. Slabs have also, and as well as Houston hip hop, has also been featured in numerous publications like the Houston Chronicle, CNN, Business Insider, Texas Monthly, Texas Highways, Vice, and more. And all the coverage has been positive, showing Slab and hip hop as forms of cultural heritage. And local politicians have been riding in Slabs now. Both of these photos feature mayors of Houston riding in Slab cars doing local events. But the biggest impact has been within the Slab community itself, as Slab is even more a vehicle for cultural affirmation and expression. There have been many more large-scale public-funded Slab events, and they're even more grand than before. Slab has also become even more explicitly political, Slab writers consistently show up to community protests and political events. And I know there were several voter registration drives that featured Slabs in the last election cycle. And folks within the hip hop community are organizing special Slab events to protest injustice. For example, in 2020, rap artist Trader Truth hosted the Ride for Justice, a Slab event honoring George Floyd, who was also part of the Through movement during his time in Houston. So Houston hip hop and Slab culture are great examples of how Black people use music and culture to self-define, affirm, and build community. And investing in and programming around African-American culture can be transformative. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Langston, for that presentation, which offers a regional insight as to how Black communities deal with their struggles for equality and freedom to practice their culture traditions. We'll circle back to that along with the go-go community at the end. Our next presenter is Dr. Fernando Orejuela, who is Senior Lecturer in the Department of Folklore and Ethnomusicology at Indiana University, Bloomington. And he's also done tremendous research in this area. And his topic is Black Lives Matter and Music. Take it to the bridge.
All right, thank you for having me. I appreciate the invitation, and I'm really proud to work with all those folks again and again. I am going to stray from my book chapter a little bit because I think a lot has happened since that publication, but I will maintain the pedagogical gaze that guided my contribution. For purposes of framing and reframing, Black Lives Matter was the brainchild of Alicia Garza, Patricia Cullors, and Opal Tometi. Black Lives Matter was first conceived during the days following the acquittal of George Zimmerman for the murder of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. The movement slowly began to take shape over the course of the following year, and the three women teamed up to set up social media accounts and under the name started planning. When Michael Brown was shot, the movement grew wings. Now, how to talk about Black Lives Matter without talking about place? Well, one way is to start with location, to set up or specify its coordination. And these coordinates mean exactly what to us? Ferguson has become shorthand for the death of Michael Brown, for a grand jury's non-indictment of the police officer who shot him, and for the Department of Justice's recommendation not to bring civil rights charges against Officer Darren Wilson. Naming a site is a way to talk about local experiences as a way of engaging with place. And that's an interesting thing, because when you focus on place that focuses on its uniqueness and particularity, and it's an attempt to separate one place from all others. However, blurring the boundaries of where the local community begins and ends reminds us that what was occurring in Ferguson is part of a pattern behavior that affects other locales. Thus, translocal is in fact in operation. Sonically, that works similarly. Coinciding with the movement came songs, and rap and R&B became the movement's soundtrack. However, the music of Black Lives Mattering was occurring before Black Lives Matter, the movement began. That has been already outlined quite nicely by Dr. Fleming a little earlier. In the contemporary moment, Kendrick Lamar's All Right becomes the anthem of the Black Lives Matter movement in 2015 and onward. In particular, the hook. In part, the hook is portable, but more importantly, the hook resonated with protesters in other places, thus acting echolocationally. Paraphrasing George Lipset's quote, Anthems proudly and defiantly assert group solidarity and reject respectability. These songs do not plot social revolution, but they do keep alive hopes for a better life. The success of the civil rights movement in the 1960s and challenging white supremacy made African American politics and culture an important source of inspiration and information for other communities of color. The women's movement, the movement for gay rights, economic class oppression, and other communities. As the civil rights movement evolved into a Black Power movement dedicated to securing resources and self-determination for Black communities rather than merely an end to legal separation, nationalism emerges as a powerful tool for political and cultural mobilization. Black Power provided a language for upward mobility and advancement without deracination. Quote, say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud, end quote. Seeking the rewards of inclusion in American society, but not as cultural assimilation that it presumes. The Black Lives Matter anthem is the hook from All Right. But when performed at protests, the N-word is usually omitted, but still understood as being present. Another set of coordinates. Minneapolis, Minnesota, and moving forward to the year 2020. I share with you an original report explaining away another deadly altercation between police and an unarmed Black man. I'm also careful not to call the following songs in this section as the music of Black Lives Matter 2020, because this is the same movement Garza and company named in 2013 and part of a much broader history of Black suffering and white brutality in the United States. That report was compromised when Darnella Frazier, the teenage documentarian, shared with the world the actual events. Frazier's recording of this moment pushes back on the process of invisibilizing Black bodies and experiences by making us, especially those of us who do not identify as Black, engaged in an intersectional approach to listening and to opening our eyes by hearing. I will focus on the sonic moment in George Floyd's call, quote, I can't breathe, end quote, which resonated differently in 2020 than when Eric Garner said it in 2014. The two pandemics in 2020, a new infectious respiratory disease and an ongoing disease of deadly racism, held many of us captive in front of our screens to watch a man's life snuffed out via clear smartphone footage that was very different from the grainy footage we had grown accustomed to when viewing the deaths of Tamir Rice, Mike Brown, Sandra Bland, Elijah McClain, and others. This time, we witnessed the death with cinematic-like close-ups of the eyes of the killer and the victim slowly dying. Hearing bystanders clearly shout, let him breathe, man, along with Floyd's one last invocation, mama. Through 8 minutes and 46 seconds, we watched, we listened, we stopped breathing, but only for a moment. Protest music became abundant in 2020, from full albums like KRS-One's Between the Protests or Run the Jewels' RTJ4, to singles like hers, I Can't Breathe. The unusual circumstances of the COVID-19 lockdown made music making happen in unconventional ways, in protest spaces, in the recording studio, and on the laptops at home. Average citizens left their comfortable COVID-free homes and marched in the otherwise oppressive geographies of a city, Minneapolis, Louisville, New York, Nashville, Atlanta, to create sites of dissent and to provide embodied and vocal reclamations that Black bodies live here while chanting, we gonna be all right. Other protest music spaces drifted to us through other outlets. I'm gonna have to skip this one for the sake of time. And move on to the sample for you here, which is a freestyle by Golden Era rapper LL Cool J on his Instagram account, and it's not a studio recording. So I'd like you just to take a brief moment to listen to part of this.
For 400 years, you had your knees on our necks, a garden of evil with no seeds of respect. In America's mirror, all she sees is regret. Instead of letting blood live, they begging for bloodlet. Revenge is a dish that's served on platelets. Transfusion of confusion, abusing our intellect. I can't be bought with a $1,200 check, even though $1,200 can make a meal stretch. My mama wasn't rich, but she earned my respect. She made a little bit of money for a lot of blood, tears, and sweat. Jumping up and down on police cars, I'm vexed. After Chauvin killed George Floyd, we got next. Molotov cocktails, anarchy on the set. The rich took the loot, so now we loot shit. Feeling like a caged tiger that's whipped to do tricks. That's why I started fires and yelled and threw bricks. They tried to run me over and arrest me and shit. Tased pepper spray and engaged with the kid. They ran up in the state house with them AKs quick. But let a try and do that white boy shit. Won't be no rubber bullets ricocheting off ribs. But the white supremacists go in the cops' faces spit. Try to barbecue, Becky calling cops on the kid. Hoping and praying it'd be some Emmett Till shit. Sandra wasn't bland, they hated Mike cause he brown. Trayvon should have had an Aston Martin riding around. Amadou Diallo, it's way too many to follow. Vato, how much of my pride I gotta swallow? God only knows how deep this plan goes. I was dealing with this shit as a teen in Kangos.
Okay, I stepped up there. There's a lot to unpack, but listening to LL Cool J spit raw, emotional verses 6 days after George Floyd's death still stirs me with every rapped line and punctuated rest. Published with no accompanying music, we hear, quote, for 400 years you had your knees on our necks, a garden of evil with no seeds of respect. In America's mirror, all she sees is regret, end quote. LL Cool J's rap is unaccompanied, but the rhythm is booming in his signature phrasing style of the 1980s. His freestyle takes on this moment, but the song is not just a tribute to George Floyd and a rap against police brutality. Metaphors abound, quote, and after Chauvin killed George Floyd, we got next. The line reads like a play-by-play, but audibly we are double hearing, a recognizable expression within basketball circles, we got next. This statement situates the listener in a broader historical narrative addressing systemic racism as in the pro version of the game. Who owns? Who gets owned? Whose talents and labors get monetized? He does not ask. He tells us to confront this nation's history and violent legacy against Black life from the whole of 1619 to 2020. LL Cool J is an elder of hip hop and could have posted his lines as a poem, but he's highly aware of the intimate effects of sound and the collective effects of sound for listening audiences. This pandemic prohibits ciphers and stops the spreading of a master's rhymer's stories throughout the neighborhood, but Instagram can do it. More than a protest song, LL Cool J's offering is an oral transmission of care for Black folks in pain and non-Black folks willing to do the work for change. He closes with Black Lives Matter. Chances of a killing by a police officer leading to a murder conviction are about 1 in 2,000. And while this conviction is significant, I cross out justice is served. For a measure of justice does not equal justice. The purpose marks better, perhaps, accountability more so than justice. Flash forward to the present. On my campus at Indiana University, I photographed the 2 images of 2 free walls on the bridge that connects the main campus to the street where most of our Greek houses and few dormitories reside. Graffiti Bridge is a place where students can paint non-offensive messages that typically praise the graffitist's fraternity or sorority or offer some expressions of goodwill or good times. The bridge had been painted over, which is normal, but this time the graffiti shared a uniform style and corresponding sentiment on each wall that reflected the current attitudes and normalization of the Black Lives Matter movement that was very different from the attitudes of our mostly white student body in the 2010s. The sentiment painted on the walls is performative. However, the statement addresses a value that was not embraced in the recent past. The summer of 2021 and 2022 in multiple ways represents a crossing over, a beginning to return to normal and the promise of combating the two pandemics that paralyzed Americans in the 2020 year, the highly infectious respiratory disease and the ongoing disease of deadly racism in the US. I will close with a sense that my students and my peers around me are getting too comfortable with normalcy, and leave you with a paraphrased pronouncement made by the performance artist and AIDS activist Douglas Crimps, quote, "It is never enough to transcend the epidemic. We need to end it. The bridge is over." Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for that presentation that now takes us through from the early civil rights music styles to go-go, through slab culture, and tie it all to hip hop, which we would further link together in certain spaces that Black people have begun to reclaim. Our final presentation is by Dr. Stephanie Shonekan, who is Professor of Ethnomusicology and Dean of the College of Arts and Humanities at the University of Maryland. Her presentation is Black Lives Matter. Black lives have always mattered in Black music. And she was one of the faculty, let's say, rebels, should I call you, at the University of Missouri when the movement, Black Lives Matter, came to surface, and was very instrumental in witnessing and organizing her students on that campus. Dr. Shonekan.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maultsby. I am, as always, excited to work with this particular group, and I look forward to continuing to see how the work evolves over time. And speaking of evolution, my work has also evolved, and my thoughts on this will evolve as well. Doctors Fleming, Martin, Wilkins, and Orejuela have done a masterful job of highlighting the ways that Black lives have always mattered in Black music and Black culture in the United States. I would like to extend that by focusing on the wider Black world, with a focus on two iconic Black artists, both of whom were deeply influenced by African-American music and its focus on social justice. Decades after their deaths, Fela Anikulapo Kuti and Robert Nesta Bob Marley remain global cultural icons and national treasures in Nigeria and Jamaica, respectively. This presentation compares the enduring impact of these two artists on their countries and on generations of music fans and cultural activists they have continued to inspire since their deaths many years ago. And so for me, I would love to continue to build this bridge between what is happening in the United States and what happens in the rest of the Black world. The second decade of the 21st century has seen a rise in xenophobia around the world. The successful Brexit campaign in Britain, the election of Donald Trump as president of the United States, and the rise of far right-wing parties across Europe have all indicated a troubled relationship between the West and the rest of the world. In addition, within Black nations, their societies have struggled to come to terms with enduring power struggles, economic liberalization, and persistent poverty. Across the Black world, the people's progress is often embroiled in and weighed down by activities that originate in the West, whether by way of international institutions such as the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Commonwealth, or even by Wall Street and corporations like Monsanto. When Walter Rodney bemoaned the waves of crushing domination in his seminal book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa in 1972, scholars and pundits could not have guessed that the situation would still be ripe for books such as Dambisa Moyo's Dead Aid in 2010, almost 40 years after Walter Rodney's intervention. Although the economic and social condition of Black folk around the world has not changed much since colonialism. Their liberation movements against the world economic system, identified by Rodney, Moyo, Fanon, Chinwezu, Said, and so many others, have evolved in the 21st century. In musical terms, Bob Marley and Fela Kuti were masters of their craft. Randall Glass explains the unique hybridity of Fela Kuti's Afrobeat sound. He said, quote, "The choppy angular guitar and electric bass figures of James Brown, whose communal rhythmic orchestrations were ironically an Africanization of Afro-American rhythm and blues, were utilized by Fela in the far more sophisticated context of African rhythms," end of quote. Bob Marley's musical prowess was no less significant. In a Rolling Stone review of his final performance in New York City in 1980, David Frick wrote that while the singer's health had impacted the fire of his performance, quote, "there is an airy, valedictory defiance in Marley's singing, matched by the Wailers' heavy, impatient swagger in songs like Them Belly Full and Jamming." What separates Kuti and Marley from other artists of their time and place is the fact that these two, assured of their identities as Black men, determined to fight the power with their music. Kuti's Nigeria experienced decades of military dictatorships and coups, resulting in a country that was politically unstable and economically harsh for the people. Similarly, although it was a democracy, Jamaica was experiencing extreme rates of poverty and hardship throughout the 1970s. Marley and his Rastafarian belief system called this the Babylon system. In his song of the same title, Marley sings, "We've been taken for granted much too long. Babylon system is the vampire sucking the children day by day." And I'm going to try and play a little piece of that just so you can hear it.
Rebel, tried it on the one way. Got to rebel, y'all. We've been tried it on the one way.
All right. Several other Bob Marley songs reflect the truth of the Babylon system. In I Shot the Sheriff, 1973, his protagonist swears that he shot back in self-defense, reminding us of the police brutality that has plagued Black urban spaces in Jamaica, Nigeria, and the United States. And yet, the Jamaican situation of the 1970s was a unique shade of Babylon, which Marley sings about in songs like Burnin' and Luton, where he says, "This morning I woke up in a curfew. Oh God, I was a prisoner too." Fela Kuti's Babylon environment is no less tragic and hostile. It seemed throughout his career that Kuti was constantly goading the players of the system. Indeed, Fela Kuti was openly combative against the corrupt system, writing songs with clever titles that said it all: International Thief Thief, Vagabonds in Power, and Big Bad Country. In International Thief Thief, he explains the extension of colonialism into neo-colonialist systems of globalization. Quote, "Many foreign countries are in Africa. They have carried all our money and gone." And I'm paraphrasing, he would do that in Pidgin English. Perhaps the most effective strategy that Fela Kuti adopted to fight the power was the calling of names. While Bob Marley kept his critique general, Kuti narrowed his target to the actual men in power. He would call names like the president himself and other members of the elite as a way of pointing to the problems that still exist. A lot of Nigerians and Jamaicans look back at Fela Kuti and Bob Marley as prophets as they look back years after they've passed. It should be mentioned ironically that both icons of Black Revolution, Bob Marley and Fela Kuti, died of illnesses that they treated very late, if at all. Their skepticism of the Babylon system led to their payment of the ultimate price. In 1981, Marley passed away as a result of a long personal battle with cancer, and 16 years later, in 1997, Fela Kuti died of AIDS. Whether their contradictions lie in the way they treated women or in their stubbornness and obstinacy, their refusal to take advice that may have prolonged their lives, both musical giants remain at the forefront of any study that exemplifies the ways in which Black music, culture, and progress are intertwined. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shonekan. Wow, we have indeed, as I indicated earlier, would be looking at notions of overcoming or notions of being in charge of taking charge of ourselves and our own destiny in challenging times of racial inequalities and police brutality. So we're at the phase now of some discussion that we may want to have just a few minutes and see how we can tie this together. So I'd like to pose a question broadly for everyone. We talk about it very well illustrated in the presentation of Dr. Martin with Go-Go in DC, Dr. Wilkins with Slab culture in Houston, and Dr. Shonekan within the broader African context, and of course, Dr. Orejuela with the hip hop and how that plays out even on Indiana University's campus, and how Black people and their allies are beginning to reclaim their spaces. So my question becomes, where do you see this going into the future? I think about notions of how the community came together to demand that the music through the speakers of the Black businessmen be heard. And it shows what communities can do when their spaces have been taken over by others, but then they want to reclaim them, and they do in very interesting ways. So how do you see this playing out, in the future as we struggle with today's climate of trying to get rid of African American studies from the curriculum, any kind of diaspora where we need to bring this back into play? We lead with this current generation of millennials and Generation XZ, and they're reclaiming their spaces. What has been your experience with the attitudes of that generation and how they're looking upon where we are now in the struggle that continues? And what I'm really interested in, what really struck me, is how Dr. Orejuela looked at how rappers like Cool J, they do know history. They do know the past. They are aware, and they can link the present with the past. In other words, the past is informing them and their strategies. So we're lost without those connections. So how does this play out with the new generation, this current generation? I'm looking at the millennials, and is it Generation X that led the Black Lives Matter movement? Where do we stand today? And how are we going to tackle these issues? What do you see happening with that generation, particularly given the climate of today and the role of music?
Thank you, Doc. Great question. And I just want to acknowledge that a couple of our colleagues have had to jump off because they're teaching right now. So I'll just answer very quickly. This question is a question I think all of us who study music, who study Black music and culture ask, which is where's the thread, right? So does the thread pull through? And one question I wanted to ask Fernando is that the LL Cool J clip is great. However, maybe not however. And he has also tried to work with country artists, right? To try and work on bringing music and self and social justice together. And so I'm thinking of his song Accidental Racist that he did with, I think, Brad Paisley. So that's a question. And I think both of the communities, both hip hop and country artists, audiences did not appreciate that effort. And so, Doc, I think first of all, the sharp divisions between audiences of American music will continue from, I think, unless we do something about the industry. And then also, I would say that then plays into the music. In my talk, I did try to bring in a little bit of focus on Jamaica and Nigeria. And what I've found is that Fela created a music called Afrobeat. And now there's a new music called Afrobeats with an S at the end, right? So the hope is that this generation is really pulling from the social messages and the political messages of Fela. And what I keep hearing from people in my generation who loved Afrobeat, they're saying that the messages that are infused in Afrobeats are not potent enough. You know, it's songs about clubbing, about dancing, about and so on. I would disagree. I still think that there's some good work that's being done in Afrobeats, the new generation's version, but I don't think it's as, I do agree it's not as potent. And I think I would say the same thing for reggaeton, and probably for hip hop as well. But I'll let Fernando talk about hip hop.
Well, I guess I have mixed feelings. The song that I didn't get to play, Lil Baby's Big Picture, was intentional because he is that Gen Z. He is not known for being a political or a conscious rapper, but he took it at that moment he has the platform, he has an obligation, and he sees a purpose. And he was right, but he did it in a way that would get the listenership of that generation. It's very pop friendly, trap beats, and it would in fact be the most streamed protest track after George Floyd's passing. He does do some acknowledgement, not in the same way that historicizes and contextualizes the way LL Cool J did, but it is an audible recognizing for me as an older generation who listened to hip hop in the 80s, to hear, the incorporation of sampled news reporters, the way that Public Enemy would have or Ice Cube would have, but also kind of even the next to nothing Crunk sample from the 1990s by Lil Jon and the East Boys is evident because it's a choice made by he and his producers to sample a song called Who You With. With is, from an audible moment you hear that, but it's also asking you the question. It's coded, questioning alliance and action. So he's young, he's reaching a large audience, but what are the actions that are going to take place? It's been now 3 years since that song came out. A lot of my students, my feeling with my students, especially in a predominantly white institution like this one, is that a lot of them feel comfortable with the conviction, and we have stopped listening to what's going on in the news today. And if anything, racism in the country has grown exponentially, including a lot of Asian hate and anti-Semitism on the rise again. I think we're getting too comfortable. I think they feel comfortable in what the movement has done in the past couple of years. Now, also the legislation that you bring up, especially in Florida, is an older generation. It's the Xers and older, and who are doing this, who are banning books, who are prohibiting history to be taught, not just Black history. This is stuff that is American history. So I cannot really predict, because this generation is so comfortable with what's going on, if they will be the first to kind of start saying, no, that's garbage stuff, once we get into the legislative positions and get rid of it. But right now, the separation of the genres that Dr. Shonekan mentioned just a little earlier, those divisions are very clear in the industry. Our current generation of kids don't even want to talk about genre. And so they don't have a problem with Lil Nas X being queer and country and rap all at once. But the industry does. And I apologize, I do have to teach a class in 10 minutes, so I got to sign off.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
All right, take care.
Thank you.
As a historian and a museum professional, I am concerned about what's happening in the world today, especially with so-called attack on critical race theory and the elimination of Black studies programs in Florida. I think we have to look to history. Carter D. Woodson started the Association for the Study of African American Life and History when African American history was not being taught anywhere. And that I would hate to think that we would go back to those days, but I think we need to support the association. We need to support the Association of African American Museums and African American museums around the country. And if we ever get into a situation where African American studies, Black history, are not taught in the schools, then we can rely upon our own institutions to tell the truth, even if it's not happening in our public school systems.
But I'd like to close on this note, which I thought was very interesting that that was brought up about this, let's say, the movement from Black voices, cultural expressions, from the periphery, a margin of society into mainstream. I thought it was very interesting that Dr. Wilkins pointed out how Slab now is a part of, everyday Houston. What does that say in the future? Do you look at that as being, because over time, as more people, as the example given about the country singer joining hip hop music and all of this, and it's been integrated, where does it go? I mean, do you foresee it as being something that would still maintain its vitality, as we move forward and create new forms of expression of resistance, of protest, etc.? Or what happens? How do we bring in other people who some of other ethnicities for a minute will be a part of something, but then when the going gets tough, they may disappear.
Right.
But it leads us back to, we must maintain the control. So how do we maintain that control, or do we leave it and create something else when it moves into the mainstream? And I close with that question. And that's true with the African, in the diaspora communities as well.
So I would just say, Doc, that I know that as Black people, our art is evolving at all times. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I also think in conjunction with that the Academy needs to now figure out what is a canon that will include the classics of Black protest music. I know we're constantly trying to see what's new, what is Meg the Stallion doing and so on. That's great, and it'll continue to evolve. But for those of us in the Academy, we need to start focusing on the music that Dr. Fleming mentioned, the music that Dr. Maultsby, you taught us at Indiana. That music will stand the test of time. That music needs to be brought squarely at the core into the Academy. I'm talking about conservatories, I'm talking about schools of music, I'm talking about places where white students will encounter James Brown, will encounter Billie Holiday. Okay, and that way the canon is truly expanded in a way that makes sense for all of our students. And I would hope that would happen at the high school level as well. And then I will plug one more time. I'm very, very supportive of everything that Asala does. And I am excited by the fact that in the future, we need to continually see bridges built between African American studies, African studies, Caribbean studies, because we're stronger when we all get together and see how this music is more of a cycle and not a continuum only.
I think that's a perfect conclusion to the session. There's nothing left for me to say. We're seeing the cycle repeat itself. You know, I think about Reconstruction and when we thought we were moving forward, and then all of a sudden that was taken away. And I think it's important that we continue to look at this, to think about this in today's climate. We're comfortable, we think we are. But as we're seeing here in my state of Florida, how slowly things are being changed. We'll see for how long. It's clearly political. There's a national ambition here. But nevertheless, I think this has been a wonderful discussion. And the lesson to be taken away from this is that the struggle continues. The struggle continues. It's the changing same. It's the same thing happening, but with each generation brings to bear its own perspective on how do we move it to the next level, but drawing from lessons of the past. A lot of times we assume that this generation does not know early history, particularly rappers and those, but they do. And they are operating from a source of information. There are some, some record what the record labels want them to record. And that's a problem. But then there are many others that gets thrown in our faces, but we don't see behind the scenes those items that are being, those recordings that are being made that are underground. They're not. It reminds me of bluesmen. We tended to think early on that blues musicians were not political. But they were. But they did not sing to the collectors, the white collectors, those songs of protest. Those songs that truly exemplified their feelings about their set of circumstances. But that's where we have this underground within our community in which the storytellers, and we go back in time and we have the complete story. So I close on that note that we really are looking at history repeat itself, and we have to be prepared as to how we address that. And in essence, the struggle continues. And thank you so much, panelists, and Asala, and all of the officers for organizing this event. Dr. Lewis, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Brian.
We're going to conclude with a presentation from Mr. Hicks, Dr. Hicks, to bring this all together with Asala and its mission. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us for our program, African American Music and the Struggle for Freedom. Please be sure to join us for our upcoming programs that will be underway for the entire month of February. On Wednesday, February the 8th, Asala, in partnership with the National Park Service, presents Walk in the Footsteps of Dr. Carter G. Woodson. In this spellbinding first-person delivery, Dr. Woodson will take visitors from the Mary McLeod Bethune Council House National Historic Site on an interpretive journey to Dr. Woodson's residence in the Shaw neighborhood of Washington, D.C. This walking tour will start promptly at 11 a.m. Eastern and is open to the public. To register, please go to our website at www.asalh.org. On Thursday, February the 9th, Asala presents Call and Response, Liberation Theology, Resistance, and the Black Church. This program will begin at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern. On Monday, February 13th, Asala will present the second of our 3 virtual author book talks. This program will begin promptly at 6:30 p.m. Eastern on Asala TV. On Wednesday, February the 15th, Asala will present the program Poetry, Fighting with Words, Then and Now. This program will begin at 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern on Asala TV. On Wednesday, February the 15th, PBS Books presents its second Books Author Talk featuring New York Times reporter Jonathan Abrams in conversation with Angel Ito. This program will be going live from 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern on Asala TV. On Thursday, February 16th, Asala will present the Carter G. Woodson Home Grand Reopening Preview Program. This program will start at 6:30 p.m. Eastern on Asala TV. On Sunday, February 19th, Asala presents Preserving Black Resistance. This program begins at 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern on Asala TV. And on Tuesday, February the 21st, Asala presents the 2023 Annual Book Prize event. This program will kick off at 6:30 p.m. Eastern on Asala TV. And don't miss the Black History Month marquee event on Wednesday, February 22nd, 2023, featuring the Secretary for the Smithsonian, Lonnie Bunch III. Access packages are $150 for gold access, $125 for silver access, and $65 for general access. Registration is required. Please go to our website at asalh.org for more information. And on Thursday, February the 23rd, Asala presents Resistance and the Black Press. This event will start at 7 o'clock Eastern on Asala TV. And on Saturday, February 25th, 2023, Asala co-sponsors The Chisholm Effect, an in-person play at the Arch Theater. Tickets are available for $150 for orchestra seating and reception, and $75 for general admission. Purchase your tickets today at asalh.org or by calling 202-238-5912. And on Monday, February 27th, Asala presents the final installment of the virtual Author Book Talks, beginning at 6:30 p.m. Eastern on Asala TV. And on Tuesday, February the 28th, Asala will conclude the month-long festival with our closing program starting at 6:30 p.m. Eastern on Asala TV. We would also like to thank our sponsors who have made this festival possible with their generous support and financial contributions. First, we would like to thank our legacy sponsors, and our History Maker sponsors, our preservation sponsors, and our media sponsors. Without your help and support, this event would not be possible. If you would like more information on how to be a sponsor or a member of Asala, please go to our website at www.asalh.org to learn more about how you can become a part of History in the Making with Asala. Or you can contact our offices at 202-238-5912. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notifications bell for our YouTube channel, Asala TV, so you can be alerted to all of our programming when we go live. You can also follow us on our social media platforms via Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for the latest information pertaining to all of our virtual events for 2023. We look forward to seeing you at our next event right here on Asala TV. And now we have a selection entitled Sit Down Servant, as performed by the Miles College Choir, arranged by Stacy V. Gibbs.